Mission accomplished in Afghanistan. The problem with the argument surrounding what our troops are doing abroad is this thing called mission creep, which you'll know that troops on the ground find very difficult, which is the changing nature of the argument as to why they're there. Do you think that British troops in Afghanistan right now understand, really feel 100% committed to what?
I think it's a good question you ask. I think it's a much clearer position now than it was for quite a considerable period of time. I think a mistake was made both in the United Kingdom and in a number of other NATO countries that in order to encourage public support for what was happening in Afghanistan, they said this is not just about dealing with terrorism or with Al-Qaeda, but we're bringing human rights to Afghanistan, we're helping women have a proper education, we're getting rid of corruption, we're dealing with the poppy trade. Now, all these things are very desirable, but it's not why we have military forces in Afghanistan. And indeed, if corruption and women's rights and human rights are to be advanced, that's going to take a generation, even if it all goes in the right direction. And therefore people got confused because they thought that corruption was still there, hadn't been removed, and therefore didn't that mean we'd failed? The simple fact is that we are in Afghanistan purely to prevent Afghanistan being used as a base for international terrorism of the 9/11 variety, of the Al-Qaeda variety, and in that respect, the intervention has already succeeded.
Do you accept, though, that military intervention on small villages and towns, the use of drones, for example, in Pakistan, as the US is doing now, whenever for every innocent life that is lost in that region, there are people so angry they will then want to counter-strike. So therefore, the interventions are never going to work.
Well, you're taking a few tragic examples and then trying to draw general conclusions from them.
There's been thousands, tens of thousands of civilian deaths. That's not a tragic accident.
Let me complete the point, if I may. It is an unavoidable fact that if you go to war of any kind, innocent people will die as a consequence of that. We were discussing Iraq a few moments ago. A couple of 200,000 Iraqis have probably died since the war was actually over because of the aftermath. There has never been a war in human history where innocent people have not died. Certainly, if you're trying to win hearts and minds, you have to take enormous care to try, if possible, to prevent that happening, at the very least to minimize it. I've no doubt that is what is being done, both by British, American and other Western forces, NATO forces.
I've got this suspicion, and it's held by tens of thousands of people, that the British military and political establishment really don't see the individuals on the ground that are being affected by our military interventions, and that, as you speak, quite lightly of them being a cost of war. Hey, people die.
No, sorry.
It feels lightweight.
You say that I was saying it quite lightly. I wasn't saying quite lightly at all. I was saying something which is blindingly obvious. There isn't a serious person in the world who doesn't understand that if you actually have a war, then sadly some innocent people, sometimes a lot of innocent people, will die, and that every time that happens, that is a tragedy. By drawing attention to that doesn't mean you are dismissing it as irrelevant. You are simply recognizing that the fact that some innocent people have died does not necessarily mean that the war was a mistake in the first place. If that was always an argument against war, then you could never justify going to war. We should never have gone to liberate Kuwait, because we couldn't possibly justify it because some innocent people died during that war. So you have to go beyond that argument and say, was the reason for the war, is the continuing reason for the war justified on legal grounds, on ethical grounds, on policy grounds? You have also, in addition to that, a deep responsibility, if you have it within your power, to reduce the number of innocent people who might get killed as a consequence of that war. Of course, that is an additional obligation of a huge kind, of a very important kind. And that is much more widely recognized, if I may say so, by British troops and American troops than it is in some other parts of the world.
Let's talk about the potential for a new face in the Foreign Office after, is it May the 5th? After the elections, the leaked, the date that was leaked, which is why we're smiling. A change of face on international policies for Britain. How would a Conservative government seek to mend the bridges that have been broken by the Bush-Blair eras? Well,
of course, the new Foreign Secretary in your scenario will be William Hague. He's been Shadow Foreign Secretary for the last 4 years. He was formerly leader of the Conservative Party. I know him very well. He'll be a very good foreign minister and a very impressive one. One of the things he himself has said is that he would want to give priority to much greater personal links and closer involvement between the United Kingdom and the countries of the Middle East. that he believes that the government over the last 10 years, the British government over the last 10 years, has not had sufficient personal contact, has not visited those countries, heard their point of view sufficiently often, and that is something which he would attach importance to. And I welcome that. I think that's a very healthy sign. I think that's only one, but it's an important example of the change that is likely to take place.
British hypocrisy on the world stage, William Hague being a new foreign secretary on the international stage. Yet your party didn't stand up for the Goldstone report, which has really unsettled Israel and their supporters, because it seems to accuse them of war crimes in Palestine. Why did your party reject the findings and not want it adopted?
Well, I think the Conservative Party made very clear that human rights problems, human rights abuses in Gaza, whether by the Israelis or by Hamas, and the Goldstone reported both.
Not on equal terms by any stretch of the imagination.
I said both. I didn't say on equal terms. I said the Goldstone report said that there have been human rights abuses both by Israelis and by Hamas. It claimed more by the Israelis, but it also said Hamas had also been responsible. I'm acknowledging that. For some reason you're not willing to.
Because it's a complete imbalance. You're just holding them up as the same thing.
I didn't say it was the same thing.
Goldstone focused largely on Israel's abuses in Gaza, as the judge saw it.
Human rights abuses.
And your party said it wouldn't adopt them if it was, that.
Forgive me. Human rights abuses are very serious, whether they come from Israelis or from Hamas or Hezbollah. They are just as offensive and just as repugnant. So
should Israel pay a price if they're found guilty of them?
I think all who are guilty of human rights abuses should be punished for that if the opportunity exists, from whichever political position they come from.
Let's talk about the future. An alliance with France is something you've been talking about, which just seems very odd to the British.
Well, Britain and France are already allies. We are both members of NATO, we're both members of the European Union. We have been friends for many, many years. The point that I have been making is that we are about to have a review of defence expenditure. Defence expenditure is under enormous pressure. Now, in the modern world, it is very, very rare for Britain to be involved in some sort of military conflict that France is not also involved in. And therefore, there ought to be opportunities to reduce costs by joint procurement, by similar use of military facilities. There are various ways which it is worth exploring. That is the kind of relationship that I was referring to.
Finally, one final question. On the foreign policy in the Middle East, will the new Conservative government, if that happens in 12 weeks' time, will they be guaranteed to treat the Israeli and the Palestinian leaders with equal respect?
Yes, I very much hope so. And the Conservative Party, indeed, I was the first British minister, Labour or Conservative, to call for the creation of a Palestinian state. When I was Foreign Secretary, that was not the position of the British government up till then. And there's no one that I'm aware of in the Conservative Party who does not believe that it is desirable to have a Palestinian state which is viable and which has proper borders, living side by side with an Israel with legitimate security for the Israelis as well. That is our policy, and that will be pursued by the next Conservative government.
Sir Malcolm Rifkind, thank you very much.